Hello everyone, and welcome to another episode of Cabinet of Curiosities on our own devices. I'm Jean Messier, and a couple of episodes ago we had a look at the history of stereoscopes, which were devices for viewing images in 3 dimensions that were a very popular form of personal entertainment in the late 19th and early 20th centuries. Now, during that video, I only briefly touched upon the last truly popular form of the stereoscope, which was, of course, the Viewmaster. But now, thanks to some collector friends of mine, I've been able to acquire a few pieces of Viewmaster paraphernalia so we can have a closer look at this truly classic product. So let's dive right in. So the story of Viewmaster begins in the late 1930s with Edwin Mayer of Portland, Oregon, who bought a controlling interest in the Sawyer's photo finishing service. And in addition to providing photo development services, this company also sold a large line of postcards. Now, one day, Edwin Mayer was vacationing at the Oregon Caves National Monument when he had a chance encounter with one Wilhelm Gruber, who was a German-born organ maker and amateur photographer. And Gruber was very interested in stereo photography and had actually come up with his own stereo camera rig, which he built by bolting together 2 Kodak Bantam special cameras. And the two started talking, and Gruber suggested that a more popular alternative to the regular postcard might be a device that allowed you to view images in 3D, an adaptation of the classic stereoscope. However, he suggested that instead of using flat cards like earlier stereoscopes, he would make use of a recent invention, which was Kodachrome color film, which had just been introduced in 1935. He also suggested mounting multiple stereo pairs on a disc so that you could actually cycle through multiple pictures within the same disc. You didn't have to load in the images one at a time. So the two went into business together and created a prototype of this device, which they called the Viewmaster. And apparently Gruber wasn't a big fan of this name. He thought it made it sound like a kitchen appliance, like the Mixmaster, but that's the name that they settled on. And they applied for a patent, they put together a factory, they managed to complete an initial batch of Viewmasters just in time for the 1939 New York World's Fair, where this product made its grand debut, stamped with the words, "Patent applied for." Now, the patent was finally granted in 1940, and around the same time, Wilhelm Gruber had a rather unfortunate run-in with the law. You see, he found that no company in the United States could produce the high-quality optics he needed for the Viewmaster, so he ordered a batch from a company in Germany. However, when the Second World War broke out and made trade with Germany very difficult, he thought that he'd lost his money. But the company issued a refund check through the German government, and when Gruber tried to cash this check, he was filmed by an FBI agent who found this very suspicious. What is this German national doing cashing a check from the Nazi government? He must be a spy. So he was arrested and sent to an internment camp in Idaho until the whole matter was sorted out. And this is particularly ironic because shortly after this, when the United States entered the Second World War, the US military realized that the Viewmaster was the perfect platform for displaying aircraft and ship recognition photos in 3 dimensions. So they actually bought something like 100,000 Viewmasters and 6 million reels over the course of the war. And this really set up the Viewmaster company. And throughout the 1940s, they would produce something like 250,000 reels every year. Now, the first reels that they produced were mainly touristic landscapes. The first 2 were the Carlsbad Caverns and the Grand Canyon. And the idea behind this was that it would save families from having to actually take road trips or other types of vacations. You could just give your kids the Viewmaster and they could look at really nice photos of these places at home. And initially, these reels were sold individually, but once they had built up enough of a catalog, they started selling them in 3-packs that were bundled together based on their theme. So they had multiple reels on the Grand Canyon, they would be put together in one packet. And this is the way that they were sold for most of the company's history. And by the early 1950s, the Viewmaster reels had begun to far outsell Sawyer's original postcards, and so the postcards were discontinued. So in 1951, Sawyer's acquired the only other major stereoscope manufacturer at the time, which was a company called TrueView. And this was a subsidiary of the Rock Island Bridge and Iron Works of Rock Island, Illinois, and had been established in 1932. And TrueView made a much slimmer type of stereoscope viewer that instead of using reels like the Viewmaster, used straight film strips. And these were typically packaged, rolled up. And apparently if you find these today, you have to be careful because if you pop them out of the can, they will spring open and fly across the room. Now, despite there only being two stereoscope companies, they really didn't infringe for many years on each other's territory. There seemed to be enough of a market share for both of them. But the reason that Viewmaster actually purchased them was to obtain their rights to using Disney characters. And this is where Viewmaster started to move away from things like the Grand Canyon and other scenic views and towards children's subjects like Disney characters or other animated or storybook characters. And this really began to dominate their business going forward. And it's around this time in the early 1950s that Viewmaster really started to reach the peak of its popularity. Just to give you an idea, the 1953 coronation of Queen Elizabeth II sold 1.5 million reels in only 9 months. They were really able to capitalize on major media events of the day. So before we cover the later history of Sawyer's and the Viewmaster brand, let's actually have a closer look at the Viewmaster itself. This particular example is a Model C, which was manufactured in the 1950s, and while there would be many different models of Viewmaster with slight changes to the aesthetics and the function, this is a fairly good representation of the general form. So it's a very simple device. You have two eyepieces here with lenses that are similar to the lenses that you would find in a Holmes-type Victorian stereoscope, but with greater magnification because you are looking at smaller images. The reels each have 14 images for 7 stereo pairs arranged around them, and these were made from 16mm film. And so that just drops in through the top here, and then there is a very simple ratchet mechanism operated by this little lever that switches between the different image pairs. And then here you have these diffusers on the light inlets. You can hold this up to the light and it will provide even illumination for the images. And some of the later models actually came either with attachments that had a flashlight mechanism in them, or that was built in so you could actually use them in the dark. So let me run you through some of the earlier models of the Viewmaster just to show you what sort of changes were made over the years. So the Model A, first built in 1938 and introduced at the 1939 World's Fair, was completely round and had a clamshell door at the top to insert the reels. And this was made initially out of Kodak Tenite plastic, but with the Model B, introduced in 1944, this was changed to Bakelite. The Model C, which I just showed you, was introduced in 1946 and introduced the classic square design. And it also came with a view light illuminator that could be clipped on over top of the light inlet. The Model D was introduced in 1955 and had a built-in internal light source and was the only Viewmaster to have focusing eyepieces. The Model E, which was introduced that same year, introduced the V-slot for inserting the reel, which would become standard on all subsequent models. The Model F, introduced in 1958, was the last Bakelite model, and it featured a built-in internal light source. And the Model G, introduced in 1962, replaced the Bakelite with more modern types of plastic, and this would be the standard going forward. Now, there would be further standard models designated H to N, but these featured only minor differences in aesthetics and function and were functionally identical to the Model G. So in addition to Viewmaster, Sawyer's also produced a line of projectors for projecting images directly from Viewmaster reels. And strangely enough, only one of these was ever an actual 3D projector. This was known as the Stereomatic 500, and this had 2 lenses for projecting both halves of the stereo pair, and it had to be viewed using polarized glasses as well as a special silver screen. Now today we use silver screen as a sort of romantic term for the movies, but early cinema screens actually were coated in silver or later aluminum in order to increase their reflectivity, so the term actually does come from somewhere. However, most of the Viewmaster projectors that Sawyer's produced were 2D. They only projected one half of the stereo pair, and there were 3 main models. The one I have right here is the junior model intended for children. There was also a larger, boxier standard model, and finally a more highly decorated version of the standard model called the deluxe model. So let me just set this up and show you what the image looks like. And honestly, I don't see what the appeal of this would be. This has to be set up about 2 meters from the wall, and it only produces an image about 15 centimeters to a side. I would imagine that the effect would be a lot better if you just viewed it through the Viewmaster itself, not least of which because you can actually view the image in 3D. Nonetheless, Sawyer's would continue to introduce various projection products. In the 1970s, they introduced a rear screen projection tabletop viewer for Viewmaster reels, while in the 1980s, they introduced the show beam projector, which was a flashlight for kids that could take a cartridge loaded with 30 transparencies that could be projected onto the wall. Sawyer's also did huge business in standard 2-inch slide projectors, and indeed they were the second largest manufacturer of slide projectors after Kodak. And their slide projectors, which were called the Rotomatic, actually had a vertical circular tray as opposed to a horizontal one, as on the classic Kodak carousel. So another line of products that Sawyer's introduced in 1952 was the Personal series, which was equipment that allowed you to produce your own Viewmaster reels. And this is a Viewmaster personal camera. And this is just a really neat piece of equipment. And let me show you exactly how this works. So as you would expect, this has 2 lenses to take a stereo pair. The lenses are fixed focus, but you can adjust the aperture and the shutter speed on them using these dials at the top here. We have an inline viewfinder. We have an attachment here for a flash. This is a proprietary attachment, and we actually had a look at the flash that goes with this camera in my previous video on the history of camera flashes. Finally, we have our winding knob here and our shutter button in the front. Now, the weird part and the really interesting part about this camera is this dial up here. Now, Viewmaster slides are 16 millimeter, but this uses 35 millimeter film. So it includes a mechanism to make the greatest possible use of that film possible. So if I open up the back of the camera, you'll see these 2 little lenses right here. And if I turn the knob in the front, those lenses will either rise or fall. So when you first load the film in the camera, you will set those lenses either at the top or the bottom. And as you go through the film, it's going to project those stereo pairs either in the top or the bottom of the film. And because the lenses are spaced farther apart than the width of those slides, it will actually interleave those stereo pairs, one inside the other. And then when you reach one end of the film, when you're done, you can then wind the film backwards, set the lenses to the bottom, and then create another set of stereo pairs along the bottom of the film. So for, say, a 35 exposure roll of film, you can get 70 stereo pairs. So once you had exposed your entire roll of film, you would take it to the developer and tell them not to actually print the photos, but rather just develop the film. You would take this film home, and then you would use a cutter, also sold by Sawyer's, to punch out the stereo pairs from the film. You would then have a home Viewmaster reel, which was made out of aluminum, and you would insert those stereo pairs into the little pockets in the reel, and you could put that in a Viewmaster or in a projector and create your own Viewmaster slides. And I just think that whole system is really, really neat mechanically. However, while it was popular at the beginning, it really waned quickly in popularity, and this system was only sold for 10 years, from 1952 to 1962. So this equipment is actually pretty rare. It's really neat to be able to look at an example. So Sawyer's and Viewmaster as independent entities really ceased to exist in 1966, when they were acquired by a firm named General Aniline and Film, or GAF. And it was really GAF that pushed the shift away from scenic vistas and tourist attractions towards more pop culture subjects, so television shows like The Man from U.N.C.L.E. or Disney cartoons and things like that. In 1981, they were bought up by a group of investors and became the Viewmaster International Group, while finally in 1997, they were purchased by Mattel and became a part of the Fisher-Price Kids brand. And this is really where the tourist attraction and scenic vistas part of the catalog really ceased to be. They've transferred over entirely to children's subjects. However, Fisher-Price does maintain a custom division to make specific reels for different tourist attractions. So for example, if the National Park Service wants a reel to sell at gift shops at the Grand Canyon, then Fisher-Price will make them a custom reel of the Grand Canyon that you can't buy anywhere else. But aside from this, the Viewmaster is now almost entirely marketed as a children's toy, and the reels will contain exclusively children's subjects. Though, ever wanting to evolve, the Viewmaster brand is now partnering with Google to produce a virtual reality headset along the same lines as the Google Cardboard platform. Still, there is no denying the enormous cultural impact of the Viewmaster, which for much of the 20th century was one of the world's most recognizable toys. Over its long history, Sawyer's and its various parent companies produced 25 different models of Viewmaster along with different types of projectors and printed some 1.5 billion Viewmaster reels. And for this reason, in 1999, the Viewmaster was inducted into the National Toy Hall of Fame. Now, that's all I have for you today. Thank you so much for watching, and thank you to Gord Crossley and Doug Carpenter for lending me these items and allowing me to delve into the fascinating history of the Viewmaster. I'll see you next time on another episode of Cabinet of Curiosities, where we'll look at yet more fascinating devices just like these ones. Until then, I'm Jean Messier from Our Own Devices. Have a great day.